Most people think manipulation is loud. Arguments, accusations, threats, but the most effective form of control rarely raises its voice. It withdraws. No explanation, no resolution, just absence. And suddenly, you are the one thinking more, replaying conversations, second-guessing yourself, trying to fix something you don't fully understand. That reaction isn't accidental. Silence, when used deliberately, is not neutral. It is psychological pressure, and 5 centuries before modern psychology, Niccolò Machiavelli understood exactly why it works. And once you understand what silence does to the human mind, you'll never experience it the same way again. Silence is not the absence of communication, it is a control mechanism that exploits uncertainty, fear of loss, and the human need for recognition. Why people don't notice it in themselves? Because silence looks passive, reasonable, and non-aggressive. There is no insult to quote, no behavior to confront. The harm happens internally, in imagination, self-doubt, and self-correction. People confuse calm with safety distance with maturity, silence with neutrality. The first mistake people make is assuming silence is empty. It isn't. Silence is pressure without direction. It doesn't tell you what's wrong, it forces you to decide that something must be. The hook here is psychological inversion. You are not being ignored. You are being activated. The moment silence appears, your mind begins working overtime, not because you are weak, but because humans are wired to seek coherence. Silence removes coherence and replaces it with ambiguity, which the brain experiences as a threat. Machiavelli observed this dynamic constantly in Renaissance courts in the 1500s. A nobleman angers the prince. The prince does not shout. He simply ignores him. The nobleman is no longer invited to dinners, no longer acknowledged in public. This silence signals danger. The nobleman feels fear, shame, and uncertainty. He rushes to regain favor. There is a critical distinction most people miss. Silence can be healthy, distance can be necessary, but weaponized silence has a different structure. Healthy space says, I need time. We will talk. The silent treatment says, you no longer deserve access. Machiavelli never used modern psychological language, but he clearly described this mechanism when he wrote that power is about perception, not force. A ruler did not need to punish constantly. He only needed to make people uncertain of their standing. And silence does exactly that. It creates a vacuum, and the human mind rushes to fill it with compliance. The nobleman, now cut off from recognition, began adjusting his behavior long before any command was issued. Silence didn't correct him, it reprogrammed him. When someone goes quiet on you, who starts working harder, them or you? Silence works because it threatens something humans are evolutionarily terrified of losing, connection and status. Machiavelli's insight was simple but brutal. People will endure almost anything to avoid loss, especially social loss. Silence doesn't attack directly, it suggests loss is coming. And suggestion is often more powerful than certainty. In modern terms, people fear emotional loss deeply. Silence represents potential loss. It removes validation, reassurance, and clarity. The mind then tries to restore balance by apologizing, chasing approval, changing behavior, not because it is right, but because discomfort demands relief. When communication is withdrawn without clarity, something crucial happens. One person knows what's happening. The other is left to imagine. And imagination is more destabilizing than reality. Machiavelli wrote, men forget the death of their father sooner than the loss of their inheritance. He wasn't talking about money. He was talking about position. Inheritance meant continuity, identity, and belonging. Silence threatens emotional inheritance. Am I still chosen? Am I still included? Am I still safe here? The moment those questions arise, behavior changes automatically. Notice how silence doesn't make you angry first, it makes you anxious. Not all silence is manipulation, but manipulation often hides inside reasonable silence. The difference is not time, it's structure. Healthy distance stabilizes the nervous system. Weaponized silence destabilizes it. One of the most dangerous aspects of the silent treatment is its deniability. There is no insult to quote, no aggression to confront. This allows the person using silence to appear reasonable. I just need space. I don't want to escalate. I'm processing. Sometimes those explanations are genuine. Sometimes they are camouflaged. Machiavelli warned that power often hides behind appearances. That actions matter more than stated intentions. The real question is not what is said, but what effect is produced. Does the silence reduce anxiety, or does it amplify it? A healthy pause sounds like, I need time. We will talk. Weaponized silence sounds like, nothing, and that's the point. Machiavelli understood that clarity reduces fear, while ambiguity multiplies it. A ruler who wanted stability made expectations clear. A ruler who wanted control left people guessing. Silence becomes a tool when it removes predictability. Ask yourself this, does this silence calm me, or make me scan for danger? The nervous system always answers honestly. Now do you know that it's possible to exude power without a single action? Most people imagine power as something active, a decision, a command, a visible move, but the most stable forms of power rarely announce themselves through action. They operate by shaping the environment in which other people make choices. When power is working correctly, it doesn't need to intervene. It simply arranges conditions so that others adjust themselves. Silence is one of the most efficient tools for doing this. When silence is used deliberately, nothing appears to be happening. No punishment is issued, no boundary is declared, no threat is made, and yet behavior begins to shift almost immediately. The person experiencing the silence becomes more careful, more attentive, more self-monitoring, not because they were told to, but because uncertainty forces adaptation. This is how hierarchy forms without force. The moment silence appears, responsibility subtly changes hands. The person withholding communication controls the emotional temperature, the pace of resolution, and the terms under which normal interaction might resume. The other person is left waiting. And waiting is not neutral. Waiting creates asymmetry. One person has access, the other does not. One person decides when things move forward, the other must remain available. This is power exercised without movement. Machiavelli understood that visible control invites resistance, but invisible control invites compliance. A ruler who constantly asserts authority must continuously defend it. A ruler who allows others to regulate themselves rarely needs to act at all. Silence works precisely because it does not look like control. It looks like absence, and absence encourages people to fill the gap themselves. Imagine a senior partner in a law firm. Not an explosive figure, calm, reserved. He rarely raises his voice. During meetings, when he disagrees with someone, he does not argue. He does not correct them publicly. He simply stops responding to their contributions. He looks down at his notes. He redirects his attention elsewhere. Nothing is said, but over time, associates notice something. Those whose ideas are met with silence stop speaking as freely. They begin double-checking their opinions before sharing them. They watch his reactions closely. They phrase suggestions more cautiously. Meanwhile, associates who receive even brief acknowledgement, eye contact, a nod, a short, go on, grow more confident and visible. The senior partner hasn't punished anyone. He hasn't issued rules, yet he has quietly reorganized the room. Silence has sorted the hierarchy. This is the key distinction most people miss. Silence does not need to hurt to be effective. It only needs to introduce uncertainty about standing. The question it plants is subtle but powerful. Where do I stand right now? And once that question is active, behavior changes automatically. The person experiencing silence often believes they are responding freely. They think they are choosing to be more careful, more agreeable, more helpful. In reality, they are adapting to a system where access and acknowledgement are no longer guaranteed. The silence has created a dependency, not emotional intimacy, but positional dependency. And because no explicit action occurred, the dynamic feels difficult to challenge. There is nothing concrete to point to, no sentence to quote, no behavior to confront. This makes silence especially effective as a tool of control, because it leaves the burden of interpretation on the person experiencing it. True power does not need to declare itself. It waits. It allows others to move first. Silence achieves this by slowing the other person down, keeping them in a state of readiness while withholding direction. One person remains still, the other adjusts. This is not about cruelty. It is about structure. When silence is used this way, it turns time into leverage. The person who withholds communication controls when tension resolves, when normalcy returns, and when reassurance is offered, if it is offered at all. The other person learns, often unconsciously, that stability depends on being acceptable, not on being understood. This is why silence produces compliance without confrontation. It doesn't push, it pulls, and the pull comes from uncertainty, not fear of punishment. Once you see this, silence stops looking passive. It reveals itself as a positioning move, one that quietly rearranges who adapts and who does not. And that realization changes how you experience it. When silence enters the room, who starts changing their behavior? By the time silence reaches modern life, it no longer wears the robes of princes or courts. It hides inside ordinary interactions, relationships, workplaces, families, places where power is not supposed to be exercised, but often is. This is why the silent treatment is so difficult to recognize when it's happening to you. It doesn't arrive with aggression. It arrives dressed as maturity, as restraint, as someone needing space. And because it looks reasonable, it bypasses your defenses. In romantic relationships, the pattern is especially potent. After a disagreement, one partner withdraws. Messages stop being returned. Affection cools. The emotional temperature drops without explanation. Nothing explicit is said, yet the other partner feels a sudden urgency to repair the situation. They replay the argument. They soften their stance. They apologize for tone, timing, even intent. Not because they suddenly believe they were wrong, but because the absence feels unbearable. What's happening here isn't communication. It's conditioning. The partner experiencing silence learns, often unconsciously, that emotional access is conditional. That harmony is restored not through mutual understanding, but through self-adjustment. Over time, this teaches them to preempt conflict entirely, to suppress disagreement before it ever surfaces. Silence doesn't just end the argument. It trains avoidance. In professional environments, the same mechanism operates under a different name. A manager stops acknowledging an employee after a disagreement. Feedback disappears. Eye contact fades. Meetings continue, but the employee's contributions seem to vanish into the room. No reprimand is issued. No formal consequence is imposed. And yet the employee begins working harder, double-checking decisions, and scanning for approval. This isn't about ambition, it's about stability. The employee is trying to regain footing in a hierarchy that suddenly feels unstable. Silence has removed the feedback loop that confirms position. Without it, the nervous system fills the gap with anxiety. Productivity increases not out of motivation, but out of fear of exclusion. The environments differ, but the internal experience is the same. Silence removes recognition, and recognition is one of the most fundamental psychological needs humans have. When it disappears, people don't just feel ignored. They feel displaced, as if their standing is quietly being renegotiated without their consent. This is why silence produces appeasement rather than confrontation. The mind shifts away from truth-seeking and toward relief-seeking. The goal becomes restoring normalcy, not understanding what actually happened. And because the silence is deniable, because no rule was broken, no insult delivered, the person experiencing it often doubts their own perception. They ask themselves whether they're overreacting, whether they should just let it go, whether this is simply how mature people handle things. And in that self-questioning, the pattern tightens. Silence continues to function as leverage precisely because it looks like nothing. Machiavelli would recognize this immediately, because he saw it operate long before text messages or office politics existed. Not because he studied relationships or workplaces, but because he understood something timeless about human behavior. People will regulate themselves when access and approval feel uncertain. They will abandon clarity to regain security. And they will do so quietly, without needing to be told. This is how silence spreads its influence in modern life. Not through cruelty, through ambiguity, not through dominance, through withdrawal. And once you recognize that pattern, you begin to see how often silence isn't the end of communication, but the beginning of control. When silence shows up, do you start seeking understanding, or do you start seeking relief? One of the most effective features of silence is not what it does to the person experiencing it, but how it protects the person using it. Silence leaves no fingerprints. There are no harsh words to quote, no explosive moments to point to, no visible behavior that clearly violates social rules. And because of that, silence often escapes scrutiny in ways more obvious forms of control never could. Silence doesn't look like aggression. It looks like restraint. It looks like maturity. It looks like someone choosing not to escalate. And because it looks reasonable on the surface, it is rarely challenged directly. People hesitate to name it as a problem, not because they aren't suffering, but because they cannot prove that anything is happening at all. This is where appearance becomes more powerful than intention. Machiavelli warned repeatedly that power rarely announces itself honestly. He believed that what matters is not what someone claims to be doing, but what effect their actions produce. Silence exploits this gap perfectly. It allows someone to maintain the appearance of calm, reason, and even virtue, while the emotional consequences are carried entirely by the other person. The person experiencing silence begins to question their own interpretation. They replay interactions, searching for evidence. They wonder if they are being dramatic, needy, or impatient. They tell themselves that maybe the other person truly just needs space. Maybe this is what emotional maturity looks like. And because silence offers no clear contradiction, those doubts go unchallenged. Over time, this self-questioning becomes the real mechanism of control. Instead of asking, "What is happening here?" the person starts asking, "What is wrong with me?" The focus shifts inward. Self-trust erodes. The original discomfort caused by the silence is now compounded by confusion and shame for feeling affected by it at all. This is why silence is so effective in maintaining power dynamics. It doesn't require justification, it doesn't provoke conflict, and most importantly, it encourages the other person to police themselves. Silence also benefits from moral camouflage. Phrases like, "I just need space," or "I don't want to say something I'll regret," sound healthy. Sometimes they are, but sometimes they function as shields. They frame withdrawal as responsibility rather than avoidance, and control as self-care. And because these explanations align with cultural narratives about emotional maturity, they are rarely interrogated. Machiavelli understood this principle deeply. He believed that rulers maintain power not by being cruel, but by appearing justified. By acting in ways that could always be defended, even when the outcomes were destabilizing. Silence fits this perfectly. It allows someone to exert influence while maintaining plausible innocence. The crucial shift, then, is not to debate intentions. Intentions are invisible, they are easy to claim and impossible to verify. What matters is effect. What happens to the emotional system of the person on the receiving end? Are they calmer, more grounded, more secure? Or are they anxious, self-doubting, and increasingly focused on regaining approval? Silence reveals itself not through what is said, but through what it produces. Once you understand this, the confusion begins to dissolve. You stop trying to decode motives. You stop arguing with explanations. You stop needing proof that something is wrong. Instead, you begin observing outcomes. And that shift alone weakens silence's power, because it removes its greatest advantage, ambiguity. Imagine a small team working under a respected department head. Calm, polite, never raises his voice. When disagreements arise, he doesn't argue. He simply disengages. Emails go unanswered. Input is no longer acknowledged. Meetings continue, but certain people are quietly excluded from discussion. If questioned, he remains composed. I don't want to make this personal. I prefer to think things through. I'm not upset. On paper, nothing improper is happening. But the team members affected begin changing. They stop challenging decisions. They become cautious in meetings. They seek reassurance indirectly. Productivity doesn't drop, it intensifies. But confidence does. Initiative fades. No one can point to a single incident. Yet everyone feels the shift. The silence didn't punish them. It repositioned them. And because it looked reasonable, it went unchallenged. Are you paying more attention to what they say their silence means, or to what it actually does to you? Silence loses its power the moment it stops being confusing. Not when it is confronted. Not when it is explained. But when it is understood. Up until now, silence has worked because it forced you into interpretation. You filled the gap with self-doubt, self-correction, and emotional labor. You tried to restore balance without knowing whether balance was ever offered to you in the first place. Once you recognize silence as information rather than absence, that reflex begins to weaken. This is the shift Machiavelli cared about most, perception. He believed the first defense against power was understanding how it operates. Not resisting it emotionally, but seeing it clearly enough that it no longer dictates your behavior automatically. When silence becomes legible, it stops rearranging you. You don't need to act differently right away. You don't need to say more. You don't need to withdraw or retaliate. The moment of defense happens internally. Instead of asking, what should I do to fix this? You begin asking, what is this dynamic asking me to become? That question alone changes the terrain. What changes when silence stops confusing you? Machiavelli did not write about kindness or fairness. He wrote about fear, loyalty, control, and perception. One of his core beliefs was simple: men are driven more by emotion than by reason. And among the strongest emotions he identified was fear of loss of status, love, approval, or security. This is where silence enters the picture. When communication stops, when silence replaces words, the mind fills the gap with fear and imagination. Modern psychology confirms this. Silence triggers anxiety because humans are social beings. We rely on feedback to feel safe. If this helped you see a pattern more clearly, subscribe to Mind Games Explained. We focus on recognition, not instruction. Comment on what psychological pattern you want explained next.